I'm John Flanders. I'm professor of business and economics here at Central Methodist University, and I like to describe myself as the resident libertarian, although there are some other libertarians on campus. A year ago I did a forum about libertarianism as a philosophy, and I used the world's smallest political quiz to try to help people find out whether there was a libertarian lurking within. A few weeks ago at a church fellowship, I was talking about my intention to vote for libertarian candidates this coming election, and I was informed by former Dean Keeling that, well, you know, I'd be wasting my vote. And even though I had set this forum up quite a while ago, it seemed quite appropriate that the Friday before Election Day I'm going to talk about don't waste your vote. But there was a piece in the Wall Street Journal a couple of months ago that I thought was interesting in terms of looking at libertarians as people. And this reported on a study, and the study collated the results of 16 personality surveys and experiments completed by nearly 12,000 self-identified libertarians who visited yourmorals.org. The researchers compared the libertarians to tens of thousands of self-identified liberals and conservatives. It was hardly surprising that the team found that libertarians strongly value liberty, especially the negative liberty of freedom from interference by others. Perhaps more intriguingly, when libertarians reacted to moral dilemmas and in other tests, they displayed less emotion, less empathy, and less disgust than either conservatives or liberals. They appeared to use cold calculation to reach utilitarian conclusions about whether, for instance, to save lives by sacrificing fewer lives. They reached correct rather than intuitive answers to math and logic problems, and they enjoyed effortful and thoughtful cognitive tasks more than others do. The researchers found that libertarians had the most masculine psychological profile, while liberals had the most feminine. And these results were held up even when they examined each gender separately, which may explain why libertarianism appeals to men more than women. All Americans value liberty, but libertarians seem to value it more. For social conservatives, liberty is often a means to the end of rolling back the welfare state with its lax morals and redistributive taxation, so liberty can be infringed in the bedroom. For liberals, liberty is a way to extend rights to groups perceived to be oppressed, so liberty can be infringed in the boardroom. But for libertarians, liberty is an end in itself, trumping all other moral values. Dr. Ayer's conclusion is that libertarians are a distinct species, psychologically as well as politically. And I agree wholeheartedly. If I had been in that survey, I'm sure I would have fit the profile perfectly. Cold, heartless, and calculating as I may be. So the topic for today is don't waste your vote. And it's not a pitch to vote for libertarians or any other party. In fact, what I want to do is talk about the economic view of voting and the political system. Us economists like to consider ourselves the queen of the social sciences. Indeed, the imperial social science, not because we're at the top, but because we imperially invade other social sciences. When I was a graduate student at Stanford, I eventually became an economic historian. But the economic historians were invading history, and cliometrics was born. And we had those historians who didn't have the math techniques on the run. Fogel and Engerman published Time and the Cross, an econometric study of American Negro slavery, and it just put the whole industry in an uproar. The historians didn't really know quite what to do. And economics has invaded political science in the new theory of political economy, and that's what this is all about, actually. Economics has gotten into the legal profession. Law and economics is a distinct area, and there's not a reputable law school in this country that does not have an economist on its faculty now, because the economic analysis of the law has proven to be so fruitful. We don't really like it when other disciplines invade our space, and this whole behavioral economics, where psychologists have started looking at our assumptions, is not especially comfortable to us, but actually I find it fruitful and interesting nonetheless. So this is one of those areas where economics has sort of jumped the disciplinary boundaries and applied the economic analysis to politics and the political system. So let's begin with the fact that neoclassical economics is built based on a key assumption about human behavior, that people are motivated by rational self-interest. I can't speak for other social sciences because I've never really studied any of them in depth, but I think economics is unique in that regard. I don't think the other social sciences begin with an assumption about human nature, but economics, at least neoclassical economics, does. That people are motivated by what we call rational self-interest. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, rational means that people weigh the costs and benefits of their actions. Self-interest means that they look at the costs and benefits for themselves and those they care about. Okay? I'm sure my actions might conceivably have an effect on people in China, and I never take them into account in my decisions about what I ought to do. I don't know them, I'm never going to meet them, but my decisions affect members of my family, and I take their reactions into account when I'm the main cook at my house. And when I make dinners, I try to make dinners that would please the other members of my family. I could only cook tofu and other weird things that I enjoy eating, but pretty soon my life would be miserable because they wouldn't like the food I was choosing. So self-interest means I look at the costs and benefits of my decisions not just to me, but to me and to those that I care about. Note that economics is not based on the assumption that people are selfish. Selfish people don't think about the effects of their actions on others. And we don't assume that greed is good necessarily, despite that great scene from Wall Street, which I often use in my classes. The economic view of the world leads to the economist's handy-dandy rule for doing anything. Do anything as long as the marginal benefit that you perceive exceeds the marginal cost. Stop where the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. Economics is amoral at a very deep level. We apply that analysis to criminal behavior. Criminals should rob as long as their perceived marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost of robbery. So we sometimes push the limits.
The claim, you put a should in there though.
I take it back. I take the should away from that. Economists would suggest that criminals are rational in the sense that they look at the costs and benefits of another robbery. They should not rob.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll take that one back. And we apply this everywhere. To illegal activities, to consumer choice. How many pieces of pizza should you consume? You should buy pizza as long as the marginal benefit from eating another piece is greater than the cost of buying that extra piece. We apply it to business decisions. Businesses should expand output as long as the marginal benefit, the revenue they earn, exceeds the marginal cost. Government policy, you should spend money reducing crime. We're fighting those rational criminals who are deciding how much crime to commit. You should spend money reducing crime as long as the marginal benefit of reducing crime exceeds the marginal cost, which implies that some crime isn't worth reducing because it would cost more than it would benefit. That applies to how much pollution should we get rid of, how many accidents should we try to prevent. The key insight there is that zero is almost never the right option. Zero crime or zero pollution or zero accidents is almost never the right option. Rational self-interest assumption doesn't change when people enter the voting booth or when they go into public service. People who work in government are the same as people who don't work in government. They are subject to the same kinds of motivations in terms of marginal cost and marginal benefit. If they behave differently, economists argue it's because they face different incentives. Once you get a job in government, it's really hard to get fired from your job in government if you're a bureaucrat. That would affect how people behave in bureaucratic jobs, for example. Now, it may be that people have different tastes and preferences toward different kinds of jobs, and people might be motivated because they think they're going to work in the public interest to go into government, but again, they're acting on their own version of what their benefits and costs are. So, the economic view of voting. When looking at voting behavior, economists assume that people will vote if they perceive that the marginal benefit of voting exceeds the marginal cost. The marginal benefit of voting might be utilitarian. One candidate's policies might be worth more money to you, lower taxes, or income, some income support program, than another candidate's. Or the voter may simply like the candidate or think that her policies are fairer or better in some non-monetary way. But, any perceived benefit from casting a vote has to be adjusted for the probability that that particular single vote will make a difference in the outcome of an election. That's going to depend on the number of voters, it's going to depend on the number of available alternatives, candidates or policies. It's going to depend on the individual voter's expectations. Obviously, a closer election, you're more likely to affect the outcome of election than if it's going to be a landslide. So expectations about the distribution of voters among different issues. In all of American history, a single vote has never determined the outcome of a presidential election, ever. Mulligan and Hunter, in an MBER published study from 2001, studied 56,613 congressional and state races, not presidential races. They've never been determined by one vote. Going back to 1898, only 7 state and 1 congressional race were determined by a single vote, and that number went down when they looked more carefully at the circumstances. Gelman and Silver, in an article in Economic Inquiry in 2012, estimated that the chance of a single vote determining the outcome of a presidential election was about 1 in 60 million. We're talking megabucks lottery numbers in terms of, if you're thinking that your vote's going to determine the outcome of election, you're probably buying a lot of megabucks lottery tickets as well, because this is about the same chance of that happening. Practically speaking, that means that any individual vote would have a minuscule effect on the outcome of an election, meaning that the perceived benefit of voting would be quite small as well. People would still vote if there were no cost of voting, but of course there is a cost of voting. Voting isn't costless. Going to the polls and voting requires the use of scarce resources, including time and foregone income. We're spoiled here in Fayette, because I stop at the polls on my way home and it takes me most of the times 2 minutes to vote, and it's really easy to do. But we got to remember that some people face a lot more challenges and opportunity costs to vote. They may stand in line for hours to vote. The result, at this level, the economist predicts that the rational voter will choose not to vote, a phenomenon called rational abstention. It's rational to abstain to vote because you might prefer a candidate's policies because it would help you in the pocketbook, but the likelihood that your vote will make a difference is so low that why bother? Because it's going to cost you a little bit to vote. So, from the economist's point of view, what needs to be explained is not why people don't vote, but why they do vote. Okay? Voter turnout in presidential elections, selected years from 1976 to 2008. Voter turnout rates are even lower in off-year elections when there's no presidential race, regularly below 50%. Each election, and I pretty much guarantee if you listen Tuesday, the experts will bemoan the low turnout rates. Why don't more people vote? They should be voting in droves. But from the economist's point of view, what needs to be explained is not why they don't vote, it's why they do vote, because of rational abstention. And for confirmation of that view, consider what happens if there's bad weather. If there's bad weather, voter turnout rates plummet. So getting wet or a little bit cold is enough to convince you that you're not going to vote instead of voting. That would seem to suggest that the perceived benefit of voting must be tiny indeed if a little bit of rain is going to stop you from voting. Okay? And regularly, bad weather means they're already talking about what the weather's going to be like next Tuesday. Because if we can get a lot of those young voters out, Obama is going to have an advantage. So a minor increase in voting caused by bad weather is enough to tip many voters to choose not to vote. And so, even when they do vote, people seem completely uninformed about the candidates and their policies. But becoming informed on issues and candidates requires a lot more time and effort than voting. Voting may take you 2 minutes, but becoming informed on the candidates and their policies may take you hours and days or a lifetime, actually. And so The Economist predicts that most people who do vote are going to be uninformed voters. Rational ignorance. Hey, I voted. I didn't know who I was voting for or what I was voting for, but I voted. Isn't that great? I say hooray for rational abstention, because let's keep people who have no interest in learning about candidates out of the voting booth in that case. As evidence, did you see one of the late night comedians did a little routine? He sent people out and asked people who they thought won the spousal candidate debate. Okay? And they were ardent about Michelle Obama versus Ann Romney. And, oh, what did she say that I don't remember what she said that I liked. I just thought she was better. There was no spousal candidate debate. These people answered this question as if there had been one. They didn't even know that there was a spousal candidate debate. Okay? This is just, a riff on jaywalking, where he walks around and people betray their ignorance about American history and American politics. They don't know who they're... And I ask this in class all the time. Who are the senators from the state of Missouri? Who's the governor? Who's the vice president? And there's one or two souls who know the answer to that question. Most of the students in my class have no idea who any of those people are. As noted earlier, from the Economist's point of view, the problem is not to explain why so few people vote. The problem is to explain why so many people vote, given that it looks like the cost of voting outweighs any possible benefit. So why do people vote? If it's irrational to believe that one person's vote will actually make a difference in a national or state of election, then the explanation must lie in the act of voting itself. I give the example of gambling. Gambling at a casino or playing the lottery is irrational if you expect to win money over time, except maybe if you're a really good card counter at blackjack, okay? Or maybe if you're a really good poker player. But most of the time, you're going to go to the average person's going to go to the boat and you're going to come away with less money over time, because they're set up that's how the casinos make their money. And the lottery, of course, at most half of the money gets paid back to people who buy lottery tickets. At least half of it's supposed to go to education. In fact, you're better off going to the one-armed bandits at the boat than you are buying lottery tickets, because the payoff on the one-armed bandits is 90% or more. And on the lottery, it's about 50% in terms of giving back money. So maybe people enjoy the act of gambling itself. That's true for my parents. They're in their 80s. They go to Arizona every year for the winter. They get on the bus to the Indian casinos, and they each say they have $20 to gamble. And they enjoy gambling until the $20 is gone. They have no expectation of taking money away. If they do, it would be great. But they just gamble until the $20 is gone, and they get pleasure out of the act of gambling. Okay? Maybe the same is true of voting. People vote not because they think they're going to change the outcome of an election, because they enjoy voting and everything that goes along with it. We tell young people that it is their civic duty to vote. We pound it into their heads. Perhaps people vote because they have been taught to feel guilty if they don't vote. If so, we don't do a very good job of it, because the 18 to 24-year-old age bracket has the lowest turnout rate of all voters, 49%. It goes up as they get older, so either they remember that it's their civic duty or something changes. Older Americans have the highest voter turnout rate, and my theory is that they don't have anything else to do, right? They're retired. What are you going to do? Well, let's talk about politics and go voting. We're excited about it. Of course, if they're on fixed incomes, maybe they think they have a lot to lose if they don't vote, and that their vote might matter. Other people may be guilted into voting based on their jobs. If you're a member of a special interest group, you may face a lot of pressure to vote by your employer and the people you work with. So people may choose to vote to avoid bad feelings that may come from not voting. Using the Economist jargon, they seek to avoid disutility. But on a more positive note, and I like to be positive when I can be, people may get pleasure or satisfaction, utility from the act of voting itself. Just as people who don't usually follow basketball get caught up in March Madness every year. I mean, I don't really follow basketball, but it's hard not to get caught up in March Madness every year and watch basketball games. In fact, it's estimated to be a huge drain on productivity in American businesses. They even have apps for your computer where you just tap it and something productive comes up at the screen so that your boss doesn't know you're watching a basketball game when you should be working. Many businesses, however, actually embrace March Madness and build it into their morale of their workers and try to make it something that will actually increase productivity in some weird way. But you know, we all get the pools and we all fill out the brackets and we all decide who's going to win and we talk about it and talk about it, even if we don't really like basketball. So voting may increase people's enjoyment because now they have a dog in the hunt, even if their vote won't make a difference in the outcome. Beyond that, people may get excited about particular candidates in the same way that they might get excited about a particular sports team. Cheering for your team when you're at the game might possibly make a difference in the outcome of the game. They say that some college football stadiums are so loud that the opposing team can't hear their signals when they're calling them. And the crowd, it's estimated, can make a difference in some cases. But when you're sitting at home in front of your TV and you're jumping up and down like I do, throw a strike, darn it, throw a strike. All you have to do is throw it over the plate. And I'm yelling and screaming as if it makes a difference, okay? I get really involved. My wife tells me to calm down. It's only a game. But I get really involved. Unless you believe in some weird version of the butterfly effect, your yelling and screaming isn't going to determine whether the field goal attempt goes through the uprights or goes to the right or the left. Okay? Does that mean that it's irrational to root for your team? No.
How about leaning?
Leaning.
If you're yelling, doesn't help. Surely leaning.
Leaning, yes. I do that when I'm watching golf. I'm going, or baseball with those home runs. But I've been known to, when I don't want a golfer to sink a shot, I've been known to blow really hard on the theory that somehow it might get to Florida and change the atmosphere in some way and keep it from going in. So, this is called the expressive view of voting. In this view, working for and voting for your favorite candidate is no more irrational than rooting for your favorite team. It's something that makes you feel good. Good news, just as people who root for sports teams may know a lot about sports, people who vote for expressive reasons usually know a lot about issues and candidates, and so may be more likely to cast an informed as opposed to an uninformed vote. Bad news. There's always bad news. Every cloud has a silver lining, but every silver lining has a cloud around it. We may end up with inefficient outcomes when most people vote for expressive reasons. Say that there's a vote on whether or not to go to war with another country. If a person knew that her vote would determine the outcome of the election, she would vote against going to war, as she believes that the total cost would far outweigh any possible benefits. Okay? But she knows that her one vote can't change the outcome of the election. And she feels really patriotic by voting for war. And if everyone behaves the same way, guess what? We all vote for a policy that none of us would want to have happen. But it makes us feel good and patriotic to vote for going to war. Okay? In addition, the anonymity of the voting booth can also lead to problems. A racist in our modern economy might avoid overt racist behavior because penalties could result. You could get taken to court, or you could lose customers. Okay? If you got a lot of black customers, possible customers, and you decide you're not going to serve black people, you could lose business to other people who aren't racist. That's how markets, in fact, penalize racism in actual free markets. But when you go in the voting booth, no one knows you're a racist in the voting booth, and it's costless to indulge your taste for racism in the voting booth. And so we vote for racist candidates, although we wouldn't overtly behave that way out in the open, because we might pay a penalty for that behavior out in the open. Anybody know why we have secret ballots in this country? Because we want it to be secret? We instituted secret ballots in this country to make it very difficult to bribe voters. When you had to cast your vote in public and you paid someone to vote a certain way, you knew if they stiffed you on the vote, okay? But with a secret ballot, nobody knows how you voted, and so bribing people to vote a certain way became much less effective because of the secret ballot. Okay? It was an attempt to create more honest elections. So don't waste your vote. When I tell people that I'm a libertarian and that I plan to vote for the libertarian candidate who are running for office, I am often told that I will be wasting my vote because those candidates have no chance of winning. I have voted in every presidential election since 1972, and not one of those elections would have turned out differently if I had voted for a different candidate or if I had chosen not to vote at all. If I was voting just because I hoped to affect the outcome of the election, then all of those votes were wasted. In my first election, 1972, I had the choice of two major party candidates, Richard Nixon and George McGovern. I voted for George McGovern. The race was widely described as a blowout. Everybody knew Nixon would win. The question was, would McGovern win any electoral votes at all? He didn't win his home state. He won Massachusetts. I voted for George McGovern because I hated Richard Nixon. I still dislike Richard Nixon. He was not a nice person. I didn't like his policies. He wasn't a real conservative. I wasted my vote because I knew McGovern wasn't going to win that election. How could I not waste my vote? Because if I voted for Richard Nixon, I would feel terrible about myself. So there was nothing I could do in that circumstance if affecting the outcome of election was the important criterion. Whoops, hold on. Here's my definition of wasting your vote. Voting for a candidate with whom you do not agree on most issues simply because you feel you must vote for a major party candidate because only those candidates have a chance of winning. The problem is that by voting in that way, you reinforce the idea that there are only two real choices, Republicans and Democrats. But the nature of our electoral process, a candidate must win enough delegates in the primaries and caucuses to be nominated for his party's as his party's candidate for the presidency, means that the candidates have to appeal to the party activists in order to get through the caucuses and the primaries. Okay? It's the activists who are most likely to work and vote in the primaries and the caucuses. These tend to be the most liberal Democrats and the most conservative of Republicans. So when you look at the political dynamics in the Democratic primaries, everyone's appealing to as far left as possible, and in the Republican primaries, everyone's appealing as far right as possible. And then as soon as they get the nomination, what do? They race to the middle, because if the voters in this country are distributed along a bell curve to the Republicans, conservatives to the right, Democrats to the left, the fact is that you have to appeal to the median voter. Because if you don't get the median voter, you can't win the election. Okay? So we nominate people who go through a process of having to appeal to the extremists in both parties, and then they have to run to the middle. And either they're extremists in and of themselves, or they're lying in order, or dissembling, let me put it nicely, dissembling in order to get their party's nominations. I suspect that many Americans who will vote next Tuesday will actually vote against a candidate, or will vote for a candidate who is seen as the lesser of two evils. I prefer to vote for a candidate who actually represents my views and to send a message that I am not happy with the direction of either of the major parties. I was thinking of voting Republican until it became clear that the Republicans had a litmus test for the vice presidency. If you were not pro-life, you could not be a Republican vice presidential candidate. Now, if you think that pro-life versus pro-choice is the determinative issue in this election, that's fine. But it ain't. Okay? What we're going to do about the national deficit and getting the budget under control, and whether the past economic policies are worth continuing, is the key issue in this election. Okay? And I much more favor Romney and Bryan than I do Obama and Biden. But, okay? If Condoleezza Rice had been selected as the vice presidential candidates for the Republicans, don't you think that they would have done a better job appealing to women and blacks in this country? But she's not pro-life, so she can't be the Republican candidate. That, to me, was idiocy. And at that point, I said, I will not vote for the Republican Party in this election. They do not represent my beliefs. Okay? Where am I? The media reinforces the view that there are only two candidates running for our elections. There were only two candidates in those presidential debates, only two on the stage. The implication being these are the only two people who can be president of the United States, which is probably true, practically speaking, but the media reinforce it. Closer to home, and even worse from my opinion, the Columbia Tribune a few weeks ago did a big multi-page spread on the Senate race in Missouri. And the only two candidates mentioned anywhere were Aiken and McCaskill. There are other candidates, including a libertarian candidate, who got no mention whatsoever in a very long article. I listened to NPR, to KBIA, and they have a regular journalism thing, and the journalists were talking, and the one guy had to regularly excuse himself by saying that there are other candidates. They assume that there's only two people worth talking about. So the media reinforce. The Democrats and Republicans don't want other candidates on the stage because people might find out that there's other people that they agree with more than Democrats or Republicans, and the media are complicit in this. They reinforce the idea. Okay? So, here's a couple of websites you can take a look at for the state and presidential election. I've already called them up, so let's take a look. Here is the online guide for Missouri elections. For governor, you can vote for Jay Nixon. You can vote for Dave Spence. There is a libertarian candidate for government that you could vote for. Lieutenant governor, you hear lots of ads, all negative from, well, mostly negative from Kinder and Monteith. Cynthia Davis is the Constitution Party candidate for lieutenant governor. For secretary of state, there's Democrat, Republican, and a libertarian candidate. A libertarian candidate for state treasurer. For attorney general, a libertarian candidate. Nobody else is running for state auditor. You can take a look at the state legislatures, and let's see, for U.S. Senate, there's Claire McCaskill and Todd Aiken, but of course Jonathan Dine is the libertarian candidate. Personal fitness trainer and marijuana legalization advocate. Yes. In U.S. Congress, District 4, they've redistricted the state of Missouri, and District 4 is now the district for both Howard and Boone counties. Vicki Hartzler, Teresa Hensley, but there's a Constitution Party candidate and a Libertarian candidate. When you go look at the presidential candidates, you've got Obama and Biden, and you've got Mitt Romney and Ryan, but you've got America's Party, the American Independent Party, and you've got America's Third Position Party, and you've got the Constitution Party, and you've got the Green Party, and you've got the Justice Party, and you've got my favorites, the Libertarians. Gary Johnson was governor of New Mexico for 2 terms, and Jim Gray was a Superior Court Justice in California. You've got the Ayn Rand Objectivist Party. That always strikes me as being really wacky. The Party of Socialism and Liberation, the Peace and Freedom Party, the Prohibition Party. Yeah, that's what we need. We need to bring back the 20s. Yes. The Reform Party, the Socialist Party USA, the Socialist Equality Party, the Socialist Workers Party, and then there's a whole bunch of independent candidates with ballot status in at least one state. And then you got a long list of write-in candidates. I don't know if Jesus is on here. We were told that he was on the ballot in some states, but there's a long list. So there are other people to vote for besides the major party candidates. And I'm not trying to convince you to vote for anybody. What I am trying to convince you is that you should think about who you're going to vote for, and that I think it would be better to vote for the candidate who represents what you believe in, as opposed to sacrificing half of your beliefs and voting for someone you don't believe in. Barack Obama promised he was going to end America's involvement in 2 wars and shut down Guantanamo. He could have shut down Guantanamo the day he took office. And has it been shut down? Okay? Either he was ignorant about the importance of Guantanamo, or he lied about his knowledge of the importance of Guantanamo, but he did not do what he alone could have done on the day after he was elected. If that matters to you, then he did not fulfill his promises to you. Gary Johnson says he would, if he was elected, and the day he took office, he would declare victory in Afghanistan, and he would bring our troops home the next day. Anybody who knows history knows that we cannot win in Afghanistan. The British couldn't win in Afghanistan. The Russians couldn't win in Afghanistan. You cannot build a nation in that country. It does not have the background that is necessary for stable nation building. We are wasting lives and dollars in those countries. Barack Obama, the day he took office, could have ended that war and did not do it. You think Mitt Romney is going to do it? So let me stop at this point. I will answer questions about anything, but elections are better.